Hello everyone. Today I want to start a series of me talking about my thoughts on collecting video games. Why this particular topic? Well, there are two reasons for it. One is that I have, especially recently, noticed an increase in questions about how do you collect video games? Mainly on Twitter, where I post pictures regularly, items from my collection, games I purchased recently. And a lot of people, especially younger people, tell me that they would quite like to take it up as a hobby, but they're worried about a lot of things. Like, where do I start? How do I do it? Will I blow the budget and get into trouble? So they're frightened and they're holding back. I try to give advice as best I can, but of course it's difficult and everyone's situation is different. So that gave me the idea of maybe just simply talking about what has my experience been. You may be able to draw something from that for your own situation. The other reason why I want to do this is a very pragmatic, practical reason. It is pretty much the only thing I can actually do at the moment as a project. I'm rather restricted due to an ongoing eye problem I've been having, which for several months now has meant that I can't really do a lot of gaming or reading or any of the things I usually do and enjoy. The one thing I can do is sit in front of a camera, show you games, talk about them, and talk about my experience of collecting games and game-related items over the last 9 years. So this video today is by way of an introduction. And I have a new assistant, by the way, a plushie from the Owlboy game, which is an absolutely beautiful platformer. As you know, I don't often play platformers, so when one does strike my fancy, I think it's really something special. Now, this little character is quite interesting. He's called a Boguin, and I thought, what on earth, where does that name come from? So I had a look on the Owlboy wiki. They mentioned that Boguin comes from the combination of bovine and penguin. There is another type of character, penguin-like, in one of my favourite game series called Disgaea. And they're, of course, the Prinnies. And the Boguins have a few similarities, I think, in the type of function they have in the game and in their overall personality. So I'm really quite tickled pink about that. Might be completely my imagination, I have no idea, but anyway, I like the idea that there's maybe some kind of ancestorship between Prinnies and Boguins. So how do I intend to look at game collecting? It's a pretty big topic. I originally thought I might be able to cover it in one video. Well, I pretty quickly gave up that idea. I think I need to go by platform. And obviously, I can only talk about the gaming platforms that I have experience with, that I have collected for, not pretending that I'm any kind of a great expert on collecting video games. I'm probably more of a rather haphazard casual collector in the way I go about it. I think I've acquired a few insights over the years into what you need to know, what you need to be careful about, if I can pass on anything, I'll gladly do so. So the platforms I would like to cover are PlayStation 3, that's what I started with, and I have a pretty good idea there what's what. PlayStation 2, which I added on. PlayStation Vita, of course, because that is my big collecting platform, my special one. The Vita is the area that I think I may possibly be the most knowledgeable about, so I'll definitely cover that. Then there's also the more recent platform, the PS4, and I think it's actually important to talk about it because with the PS4 sunsetting, so to speak, quite soon, the issues around being able to collect games for it are beginning to emerge. If you are thinking of getting into collecting and maybe want to choose the PS4 as your platform, there are a lot of things to consider and much you can prepare for already at this stage. I have also collected for the Nintendo DS and 3DS, and that's another platform that's very close to my heart, and I certainly would like to share some of my treasures and what I've learned over the years with you. I do not consider myself a collector for the Switch. I obviously do buy physical games once in a while, but that in itself doesn't necessarily make you a collector. I don't have any aspirations there. I won't cover the Switch. I can't. The Switch is a huge topic, and there are so many channels and sites out there covering the Switch that there's no way I can add anything meaningful there. So I will focus on the ones that I think I know enough about, and that's basically PlayStation 2, 3, 4, Vita, and the Nintendo DS, 3DS. So I've explained which platforms I'll be focusing on. They are more recent ones. They're therefore still more accessible in terms of being able to collect for them. But some are already getting a bit more difficult. And surprising how quickly that can happen. And I'll certainly be talking about that, especially where the PS3 and the Vita are concerned. The Nintendo DS would fall into that category as well, of course. I mean, we all know about how crazy it is with Pokemon, but I've seen some crazy stuff happening with Dragon Quest games, you know. Shocking things happening, aren't they? It can even happen already at this stage with a few PS4 games where I've seen rarity causing crazy spikes, like, you know, with a game like Blue Reflection. So I'll be talking about that. How can you analyse a situation like that and be better prepared for it if you missed out? So the question really arises, what is a collector? Who qualifies as a collector? Well, the interpretation will be up to whichever way you decide in the end. It's obviously somebody who collects certain items, in this case video games. But I would just like to classify it into two categories, and then you can see which one you might fit into, because accordingly your strategies will be very different. The first one I would call the investment collector. That's a person who wants a hobby, chooses video games because they appeal to them, they have an interest in them, they're possibly knowledgeable about them, but they don't want to waste their money and, if possible, accrue some money over the years by choosing wisely, just like you would with any investment, I suppose. You find that there are many people like that, especially in retro game collecting. So retro games in particular can be a focus for investment collectors, but I'm talking more here about people who just on a smaller scale would like to do it and are hoping they're not going to lose money but might possibly gain some in the future. Maybe something they can pass on to their children and grandchildren later on. Now, the one thing to remember if you think, oh yeah, that sounds good, I'll do that, is that any investment is a form of speculation, and ultimately you're playing roulette. And that's something I have found over the years with games. Oftentimes a game that looked very promising in terms of, whoa, that'll be worth something in years to come, just fizzled out, and it never ever became the champion that people thought it would be. And other games snuck in from the back and overtook them, games that nobody ever thought would suddenly become valuable. There they are. And everybody says, how did that happen? These things do happen. And that's part of the thrill and excitement, but can also be a source of frustration. So you need to be very aware of that, and that any money you put in, you may or may not be able to recoup. So it's always a good idea to have a firm interest in your hobby that extends beyond the financial, I think. Now, the second class of collector would be what I regard as the typical collector, the sort of people I talk to on an almost daily basis, and that's gamers who love games and want to have a physical collection for the future, for their enjoyment, and for other people's enjoyment as well, maybe in their family, but who don't look upon their collection as something they worry about in terms of monetary value, because it's personal and emotional value that's important to them. And that's the type of collector I see myself as, really. It's as much about the thrill of discovery, of sometimes hunting down an elusive quarry, maybe sometimes adding a very beautiful addition. So collecting is a bit like beachcombing. What's one person's trash is another's treasure, very often. The game you want to find that's for some reason important to you doesn't have to be expensive or highly valuable or rare or a particularly good game. No, I have a very nice example for you. Those of you who watched my video How I Got Into Gaming will probably now recognize what I'm holding up and talking about. And that's, yes, Tomb Raider, Angel of Darkness. Oh yeah, she rises again. A PlayStation 2 game which I recently found somewhere in a bargain bin or online auction. You can see someone picked it up for $5 and I then picked it up. Well, I just had to have it. Obviously, it's part of my history as a gamer. And yes, I have started playing it, and once I get used to the camera and the very dodgy controls, I should be okay, and I hope to be able to report on this game at some point. So definitely a treasure in my collection. Collecting in the video game sphere can of course extend to other items as well. I like to cast my net quite wide, but there's no reason why you would not maybe focus in on a particular type of item, like for example plushies. You might decide you're not going to collect games, but you will just collect game plushies. A very noble enterprise in my opinion, and very rewarding. You might be one of the people who loves collecting amiibos. I've got the 2 here from Monster Hunter Stories 2. I know there are lots of people out there who are really, really serious about collecting their amiibos. Or you might decide you really, really love figures, statues or posable figures. There are all sorts of different ones these days. For example, like Siri here. Now she was produced by Dark Horse, but there are other Siri figures out there. Oh, you'll say, figures are super expensive. I can't afford that. I totally understand. And we'll come up against that all the time. Budget is really the deciding factor in the end for most decisions. But it doesn't always have to be expensive. I got this Siri figure for around $25 and it's a very nice figure. So sometimes you can find and pick up a bargain. It doesn't have to be the $300 statue. Or you might decide you want to focus on a particular genre or just one specific series. You might decide, like me, that you want all the games in a particular series. Disgaea 1, Disgaea 2, Disgaea 3, Disgaea 4 on the PS3, and then on the PS4, Disgaea 5, and finally Disgaea 6. And then of course you don't stop there, because there were Disgaea games on the PS Vita as well, and now we have Disgaea games on the Switch. There is ample opportunity for collecting, maybe just a few of your favorite game series. And I think that would be an excellent way of doing it, because you're keeping it narrow and focused. You're not going to be overwhelmed. You can calculate your budget much more precisely and work out exactly what you can afford. If I was starting out all over again, I think I might. If you just want to focus on a particular genre, then I'll just pick one that I like and buy a lot of games for, and that's visual novels. There are heaps of them, and on all platforms. I've just got a few here, just a small selection on the Nintendo Switch. Yes, I said I don't collect for the Switch, and I don't, but I happen to have these on the Switch, because that's where they're published these days, a lot of them. And that's just a small selection. So once again, if you pick just that one genre and looked at, the Vita, the Switch, PS4, you'd be pretty busy. So what are some of the topics and issues that I want to address in the series on collecting video games. I've thought about it quite a bit over the last few weeks, and I've made some notes about the topics I want to cover. I grouped them under the skills of a collector, because that's really where it's gonna stand or fall, whether you can realise your dream of having a wonderful collection. Now, the very first skill I noted down is patience. They say patience is a virtue, and I think that must be true, because I'm famously rather short of it. It's been a very good learning experience for me. Yes, patience. The second one is research. Painstaking research. Is there any way around this? I don't think so. So if this is something that you really don't enjoy doing and it's not your forte, then you might want to reconsider, because I cannot see any way around this one if you want to be able to chase down and get those important games that will make your collection special. Under that point falls knowledge of the websites and channels that you need for information and support services, and also the software you might want to use to keep track of your own collection, of prices in the market, etc. Another topic that will be ever present is budgeting, obviously. Money, prices, budgeting. Also, and I think this is actually really important, is networking with other collectors. That's something I found invaluable over the years. You can't do everything on your own. We all need help at certain points, and especially when you're starting out. You might even want some kind of mentor. I think that's not a bad idea at all. And I've certainly had some people help me in my first years when I knew basically nothing. And later on, I, developed a lot of contacts with people who have a similar interest in games and the type of games that we collect. Finally, I also will want to talk about the tricky aspect of becoming overwhelmed, possibly becoming addicted. Yes, it's possible. You can get addicted to almost anything in life. That's the problem, whether it's cigarettes or alcohol, doesn't matter, gambling, a hobby can become an addiction. One driving force there is unfortunately something referred to as FOMO, fear of missing out, and that's a really, really nasty gremlin. So I'll be trying to nip that one in the bud whenever I can, because I've come pretty close to getting FOMO on a few occasions and had to pull myself back, and it's nasty, and you just don't want to go there. So I'll certainly be talking about that as well. Collecting for me is not primarily about the big, flashy collector's editions. There is a place for those, but it's a special one-off place. The bread and butter of collecting is in the individual games. Most of the time you'll be looking at standard editions or day one editions. That's really what I focused on, because it's the games that matter in the end. We want to play them. Just having the game, and not just now but for the future, is important to us. There's a lot of issues there in collecting around what I call the right time and the right place. I see a lot of people on social media complaining that they can't get hold anymore of certain games. Older Pokemon games would be a good example of that particular issue, and we'll be talking about that. The issue of rarity of games. What does it actually mean? How does it manifest? How do we cope with it? Suddenly a game becomes rare. The vagaries of the market A lot of it is random and completely unfair from our point of view. But as a collector, you need to develop a tough skin, and roll with the punches. Sometimes you need to accept a situation and move on and focus on what's achievable rather than fret over what you cannot have. I know heaps about that situation. Yeah, collecting is actually a lot of hard work. Great for a hobby, eh? Yeah, I totally understand if someone says, "Why, that's not for me, that's not a hobby for me." I totally understand. Enjoy your games and just don't worry about a thing. Collecting is actually not an easy hobby. If you want a really easy, very stress-free hobby, I can't honestly recommend collecting because it's a lot of hard work. It can be immensely rewarding, but you've got to be prepared for a lot of troughs and valleys. I also just need to remind everyone that I'm in a very small region that is not very well serviced for video games, so it's a lot more difficult for me and I have to import a lot. If you are located in North America, then I'd say you're in the prime location for access to games and game collecting. In Europe, if you're in the UK in particular, you're also very well placed. Otherwise, it can get a bit more difficult. Certain parts of Asia certainly have great access to games, and Asian editions in particular. Many of us are in locations where it's not quite as easy as that, and we have to rely on online trading sites and services, which is not ideal. But as I said, you need to manage what is available to you and cope with the situation. So if at any stage you're wondering, why was it so problematic getting hold of that particular game or edition? Well, the answer is probably because I'm in this region and didn't have easy access like you might in North America. Of course, North Americans don't always have an easy ride, and I certainly observe that with certain games, certain Japanese games, especially with Nintendo, there are continuous problems over print runs and access to things like collector's editions, where the situation in Europe and in my region is often just a bit easier. So it swings and roundabouts, really. Now finally, there's one more item that is actually collectible as well as useful and related to gaming that I just want to mention, and that is strategy guides. I was just talking about Oblivion with some people here on the channel. Vagrant Story. I have quite a lot of strategy guides. Crisis Core, very topical at the moment. I like strategy guides. They're a wonderful way of reliving your adventure, of catching up with things, of deepening your knowledge and experience with the game, and sometimes of quite practically helping you out when you're stuck. And a strategy guide that is really well written, well produced, well illustrated is just a joy to have, like any good book. If you wanted to choose something that's not games but game related, strategy guides are, I think, a great collecting hobby to have. What do you say, Boguin? Have we covered most of what needs to be said in an introduction? Yes? He's rather cute, isn't he? And he's incredibly soft and squishy. So that's it for today. Thank you very much for your interest, as always. Let me know your thoughts, please. From me and Boguin and the whole crew, it's goodbye. Please keep well. I'm food for dogs. Bye-bye.